In progress.
Okay.
Shauna, do you want to say anything before I do?
So I'll be starting, Christine, and then now, yeah, I don't know. Is it Christine that goes first? Is that right?
Yeah, that's fine. I don't, I'm good. Sorry.
All good.
Great.
Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending the No Need to Recreate the PV or EV Wheel webinar today. This recording is recorded and the recording is available to all attendees on the Code Adoption Toolkit. Usually it's posted within the next week or so, so keep an eye out for that. If there are any issues with audio, just feel free to write me in the chat. My name is Erica DeLello and I'm a project manager for NORESCO. This series is sponsored by the Colorado Energy Office with training materials created by SWEEP and Mozingo Code Group. So we've been working with the Colorado Energy Office to provide trainings just like this one. We've got one more webinar coming up on December 7th, but then we also have an in-person training for code officials if you're interested in the commercial side of plan review and what to look for in the field. Please be sure to register for this. I'll put the link in the chat shortly for that registration. We also offer trainings, tailored group trainings. If you'd like us to come out and visit your jurisdiction and do a training, we're available to do that, or even technical assistance where we assist in code adoption. If you see some of the code language that you're hearing about today and you're like, oh, I really want to include that. How can I go about doing that? Feel free to reach out and we can set you up with a subject matter expert to help. So most of you might know about the Code Adoption Toolkit already, but of all the resources available, I want to highlight one today, and it's the Colorado Codes Helpline. And this helpline is available to any industry professional or homeowner, anyone that has a question in the state of Colorado about the building codes or how it applies to them, not only in regard to the IECC, but the whole suite of codes in addition to stretch codes as well. So you can easily submit a question and a subject matter expert gets back to you in just a couple days' time. So throughout the webinar, we of course want to encourage questions, so feel free to write them in the chat or the Q&A, and then following the presentation, we'll be letting our presenters know so that they can answer you all. There's also the ability to raise your hand to ask the question, and I can unmute you too. And then lastly, there's a survey window that pops up following the webinar. Please take a minute to provide some feedback for us so we can continue to improve and provide new resources for you all to help you in assisting in compliance. So today's presenters are Christine Brinker from SWEEP and Shauna Mozingo from Mozingo Code Group. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen here. And Christine, you should have access to share yours.
Okay, give me 1 second. Share, and then let me get it into slideshow mode. Hi, everybody. Slideshow mode. There we go. Okay. Glad you all could join us today to talk about EV ready and solar ready language that can be an add-on to your energy code adoption. And for a little bit of background, we've been developing this language, Shauna and I, along with Shams Coda and Lotus, with some help from Xcel Energy, Department of Local Affairs, and the Colorado Energy Office. And those two state agencies, they gave us some funding to run a couple different code cohorts with groups of about a half dozen different local jurisdictions, one in the Northwest Denver metro area, kind of around Boulder County, and the other in Eagle County. And so all of these different local governments have been working with their neighboring communities to adopt very similar language, and that's the language that we're going to be presenting today. So how they came up with narrowing it down to EV ready and solar ready was first by looking at each community's adoption schedule, and then looking at what other amendments or or energy code add-ons were already widely adopted across the state or have a lot of increased interest. And then the Colorado State Legislature changed the law on us, so we kind of recalibrated to make sure that we're staying in compliance with the new energy code law. Then we screened down a whole bunch of amendments. We looked at probably 100 or 200 and narrowed it down to EV ready, solar ready, some electric ready language, and then just a couple efficiency amendments. And so we're obviously just talking about those first two today. And then we refine them with some builder input. So why did we narrow it down to solar ready and EV ready? Mainly for these 6 reasons. It is so much cheaper to do it right up front when you're building a home or a building than to retrofit it later. Many, many times cheaper to do it up front. You save on the electric system upgrades, you save on breaking apart the walls or landscaping, and then you save on a whole bunch of soft costs, including permitting, etc. We also see more and more homeowners and building owners wanting this capability in there already, increased interest there, and then helping move the market on these critical technologies so that we can get to those climate goals. There's also an important equity component to point out that renters, they don't have the ability to put in some of these things. They don't have the ability to put in an EV charger, for instance, if you're renting a place. So offering that as an equity component is important too. So I mentioned the new state law that we made sure that these would hopefully be in compliance with. I think you're probably all familiar with it, but if you're not, it says that every local jurisdiction has to adopt at least the 2021 IECC along with EV ready, PV ready, and electric ready language when updating any other building codes. And this starts July 1st. Before that, the old law still complies where you have to adopt one of the 3 most recent versions of the IECC. And then the next phase of that kicks off July 1st, 2026, which says that local jurisdictions, when they update any other building code, have to adopt something equivalent or better than a low energy and carbon code. And that exact language is going to be developed by the new Energy Code Board that just started meeting. Local governments can go above, but they have to at least meet these minimums. And so what we're talking about today, it is not vetted yet by the Energy Code Board because they've literally just started meeting, but we do expect that these would most likely comply.
Christine, I would just add, I mean, for me, helping jurisdictions adopt codes, whether it's through the cohort or I don't know, I'm helping dozens of them. And I can tell you that just from my side of it, in helping people adopt new codes, that 9 out of 10, and that's probably conservative, 9 out of 10 jurisdictions are asking, even if the state is not asking them to go there yet, 9 out of 10 jurisdictions are asking for some sort of EV and solar ready. So when we go back to that, why are we doing this? Because so many people are asking for them that we really, really want to get some consistency so that it's maybe easier to do. And then when the state finally does go there, maybe we could show that what we're doing is really working and they won't have to recreate the wheel themselves and they won't have to change a lot of things because we've got something that's tried and true and worked. So with so many jurisdictions requesting that we provide some sort of language on EV ready and PV ready, it just became important for us to create this language and have this webinar for you guys today.
So we thought we would start with solar ready, frankly, because it's very easy. We have a growing number, like Shauna was saying, of jurisdictions that already have this in place, plus a whole bunch that are that are aiming to put this in place in their next adoption. You can see a list here. A couple of these actually do require solar itself, but for the most part, we'll just be talking about solar ready. And so let's start on the residential side, single family duplex townhomes. This is super easy because there is already an official IUCC appendix that has been through the ringer in the ICC process, developed over a couple of code cycles with literally thousands of experts inputting their knowledge into making this work. So that is Appendix RB. It does have a few small changes from the 2018 edition, but in general, on the residential side, it requires that the roof have some space reserved for future solar, called a solar ready zone, of a certain size. And that solar ready zone, it has to be free from obstructions and avoid existing shady objects. You have to show it on the construction documentation and on the permanent certificate. You have to have adequate roof structural capacity. It doesn't define that specifically. Some conduit, and then space on the electrical panel labeled for future solar electric. It does exempt roofs that are especially shady to start with, since it wouldn't make any sense to put solar in those situations. And then on the residential side, it excludes multifamily completely. It specifically only applies to single family duplex and townhomes. And then I have the next slide just looking at the cost, and I'll see what Shauna has to add. The cost for residential is minimal, in fact, so minimal that almost nobody has calculated it. We guess about $200. It's mostly just for the conduit. The PV system itself is almost never required in local jurisdictions, except for those couple we noted. But if a homeowner does want to put in solar, they're running about $15,000 to $20,000 recently, or you could lease them free. More people are aiming towards buying them outright, and you often using some financing from the state for that. So Shauna, what would you add on the residential side?
I guess I would just, I would highlight, I don't know if I'd add, but I'd highlight that minimal cost, because this truly, the EV ready appendix, the solar ready appendix, is really a plan review type of an item. I mean, it's requiring almost everything on plans. Show that the load was calculated for, show that you had space for it and that you don't have a lot of shading, show that where things are run. And so really maybe some costs, like you say, for some conduit. And so it's probably, of all of the additional efficiency and above code is what a lot of people think of these things as, of all of the things we ever recommend, this is like the cheapest thing we've ever recommended, I think, that you've ever heard us recommend. So that, I just want to highlight that. Yes, it's not saying you have to put solar on. It's just saying show that it's ready, so that when somebody else decides they want to do it, they don't have to go hire an engineer to reevaluate. They don't have to run the conduit. We've got the easy part done. So.
Yep, exactly. I agree with that completely. Turning to the commercial side and some multifamily, again, on the commercial side, it's an official IECC Appendix CB. It has the same general items as on the residential side, but with a little bit more detail stuck in there. So not less than 40% of the roof area reserved for future solar. And when calculating that, first you take off any other roof space that's used for skylights, green roofs, amenity space, fire code setbacks, etc. And so that remaining area, 40% of that remaining area, is called the solar ready zone, free from obstructions and avoiding shady objects. You show it on the plans, the construction documentation, and the permanent certificate. You make sure you have adequate structural capacity, and here on the commercial side, they do define that as an additional 5 PSF of dead load, including on the design. Then similarly, conduit from the solar ready zone to the panel There is also conduit. This is new on the commercial side, conduit for energy storage or hot water, and then space on the electrical panel. And so the commercial side, it has an additional energy storage ready area, which is a certain amount of square footage reserved for future energy storage plus the conduit. Already shady roofs are exempt. If you're literally installing solar already, you're obviously exempt from having to do this because you do it anyway, or if you have extensive roof obstructions. For multifamily, this only applies to multifamily buildings that are 4 and 5 stories. And I want to dive into that last point a little bit more, but let me see if Shauna has something to add here first.
Yeah, I was just going to say that while it goes just a little bit further into the detail on the residential, one highlight that these are already existing appendices. So these are nice. They were in the 18 too. So if you're one of those jurisdictions that wants to stay on that 18, I guess it's there and you have it available to you. But I also want to highlight that some people, like we want the wording, but we don't feel that the appendix went far enough. We have ways, and we would be happy to help you take it to the next level on these appendix chapters. It's just some people want this base minimum, and so this what gets you there. It's again that plan, put it on the plan, shows how you have everything ready, and then run that conduit and get the pan and label the panel, and then a lot of exceptions out of it. But there's ways to make it go a little further. We have people that have been doing that, so let us know if you want some help with that as well. Minimal cost for huge benefit.
Yep, exactly. So looking a little closer at that multifamily situation, this only applies to commercial multifamily buildings that are 4 and 5 stories. The residential doesn't apply to any multifamily. And so when you add these two together, there ends up being a gap where you don't have any solar ready covered for multifamily that is exactly 3 stories or multifamily that is above 5 stories. So it is only 4 and 5 stories that's covered between these two appendices. And from what I hear, that was kind of accidental of the two sides not quite coordinating. I suppose there's different stories in there, but this is a very easy fix. And all you do is you say that the residential appendix RB applies to all buildings that are regulated under the residential chapter. And you say that CB applies to all buildings that are regulated under the commercial chapter. Simple.
Yeah.
And that makes intuitive sense as well.
I think that if there's a lot of people who maybe don't even realize that there's a problem in that, it's just remembering there's a definition for a residential building in the energy code that's different than in a lot of codes, or a definition of a commercial building that is different than the other codes. So when it comes to multifamily, it's 3 stories or less is a residential building, and it's supposed to use the residential chapters. 4 stories or more is a commercial building and uses the commercial. Most people think, oh, it's a multifamily building is built out of the IBC, so it must be a commercial building. It's not built out of the IRC. It's built out of the IBC. It's a commercial building, but it isn't. It's based on how the buildings perform, not their occupancy. So 3 stories or less residential, 4 stories or more. So another fix might be to just say RB applies to residential buildings, because that's a defined term, right? And CB applies to commercial buildings, which is a defined term. Then you would, either one of those will get you all of the buildings instead of this 4 and 5 story building, which is kind of crazy.
Yep. So that is our recommended language, just fairly simple. Adopt Appendix RB, but amend it to include all buildings covered by the residential chapter. Adopt Appendix CB, but amend that to apply to all buildings covered by the commercial chapter. Fairly
we're not,
simple.
we're not recommending anything grand, just the straight appendix. If you want more, we're happy to help you write more.
Exactly. And good lead in for this, basically our qualitative ranking for where this falls, we'd call it fairly mild, not least because it's required by state law for jurisdictions, for updates after July 1st, and the cost is really minimal. For jurisdictions that wanted to go one step further, one step more aggressive, you can have solar required on some buildings for part of the load. Examples include Crested Butte, Basalt, and Denver. You could also investigate a solar access law, which typically lies in the land use and zoning code, which says that a new building can't block someone's existing solar. So that's an additional add-on. So very aggressive would be solar required on basically every new building, covering most of the load as feasible or covering all available roof space, something like that. The example is Louisville for residential, because Louisville adopted the net zero appendix that requires covering the rest of the load that you don't meet through energy efficiency through solar somehow. Solar access law there as well. And then another item in that aggressive category would be including roof replacements. Everything else we've talked about now has just been for new construction. And you could define exactly what type of roof replacement would qualify. And that's it for the solar ready side. Anything else to add, Shauna, before we dive into EV ready?
I don't think so.
We
Okay.
do have one
So-
question if you'd
Yeah.
like to answer it.
Perfect.
So if our jurisdiction has already adopted the 2021 IECC, we would not need to include the EV/solar ready until the next adoption cycle, question mark?
If you're trying to say that you're to comply with the state law when it goes into effect in July, that is correct. So if you, whatever you adopt now, you're fine. The law in July just says when, after July 1st, when you go to update your code, you have to add that. You have to be on the 2021 or better and add those things. So yeah, you would be fine if you do it, your adoption now.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect,
Yeah.
thank you.
And that reminded me of another common question you get. Even though these solar ready appendices are officially prepared for the IECC, they don't come unless you specifically adopt them. They're not just part of the package. You have to actually write in your adoption that we are adopting these appendices.
Yeah, each appendix chapter in all of the codes has a disclaimer right at the top that it's only required if the jurisdiction specifically calls it out as an adopted appendix.
Mm-hmm. So EV Ready was nearly in a similar situation. It actually was in the final draft of the 2021 IECC as I believe as an appendix. And then it got cut at the last minute by an appeals board. So that language got stripped out, but we still have a whole lot of jurisdictions that do want something and are putting in some flavor of EV Ready. So let's dive into that. The reason we need EV ready codes is because EVs are taking off. The market transition is most certainly underway, and we can't have situations like this, which is just horrible for a whole number of reasons. And so EV ready, similar to solar, it prepares the homes and buildings for the transition to EVs so that if someone does have an EV, they will have an option of having somewhere to plug it in. This maybe in the past used to be a nice to have, but it's turning into a have to have because the transition seems to be fully underway. Here in Colorado, we had almost 10% of new vehicle sales were EVs in the first quarter, and we have all major auto brands that have announced plans to shift the majority of their fleets to EVs by the 2030s, a number of them earlier than that. So all the major auto brands are on board with this transition as well, and people need a place to charge. It's become clear that almost everybody just wants to charge at home overnight. You can charge out and about around town if you have to, but it is really convenient just to pull into your garage, plug it in, and never have to go to a charging station unless you're on a big road trip. This again is especially important for multifamily because a number of renters do want to have an EV and they need somewhere to charge it. We know folks that are using just a 120 outlet, like a really normal plug that takes hours and hours, and they have to share that between 3 other families in their multifamily, in their apartment complex, and who has it this time? It's a pain in the neck. And so having the EV ready infrastructure there is crucial, especially for apartment dwellers. Apartment dwellers also tend to be younger folks who also coincidentally tend to be more interested in adopting the EV. So there's a lot more interest in that sector. And last but not least, it's required by the new state law for jurisdiction for adoptions after July 1st. Looking at the costs, we're starting to get some more data in, and as you do find more data yourself, send it in so we can continue to update our estimates. But for single family, the estimates are ranging about $325 to $400, and that is essentially just for the conduit and the wiring and the space on the electrical panel. Retrofitting it later costs many times more than that. For multi-family, the same deal. Retrofitting it later costs many more times, many times more expensive than that. So when we're looking at the actual code language, you'll see these 3 terms thrown around a lot, and they are just increasing in complexity. EV capable means just the conduit, essentially, plus room on the electrical panel. EV ready is the next level, and that's not just the conduit, it has the actual wire and the actual plug, a 240 volt outlet. We call it a dryer outlet. It's not exactly the same as a dryer outlet, but at least most people can envision what a dryer outlet looks like. It's not the actual charging thing. It's just the socket, just the place where you would stick a plug. The actual charging thing would be EV installed. And that means installing a certain number of level 2 charging stations. Level 1 is like a normal plug that takes hours and hours and hours and hours. Level 2 charges a car in I don't know, 5 hours or so. Level 3 are the kind that charge in 20 minutes or less. So that's the terminology. When we look at what jurisdictions here are requiring for single family, this is super easy because almost every single jurisdiction just says 1 EV ready space per dwelling unit. The difference is a couple of them are EV capable, but these tend to be older adoptions that are now in the process of updating to say just 1 EV ready space. Then on the more aggressive side, scrolling down, is Louisville that has 1 EV ready and 1 EV capable space per dwelling unit. I think this probably isn't necessary in almost any case, because if you have 2 cars, you can just share the same charger. So that one is super easy. When we turn to commercial and multifamily, it's going to get a lot more complicated. Let me show you this next slide real quick. So there is a whole bunch of text there. So I took all of this and summarized it into some trends here. And what we're seeing is that the more recent the adoption, the stronger the requirements. So the really mild ones tend to be a number of years ago, and then the ones that are underway now have more requirements. There's also a lot more nuance to it, in particular recognizing that different building types have different charging needs. Are you staying for a while, like an apartment or an office building, or are you just going in and out again like a grocery store? There's also the increased recognition, like I was saying, that most people just want to charge at home overnight. It's super easy. And so that is why we have more requirements for multifamily compared to the rest of commercial. And that's some of what these newer adoptions are reflecting. Some use percentages, some use number of spaces per parking lot. There seems to be more on the percentages side, and the recent ones seem to tend more towards percentage sides, but we do see both. And finally, we need to make sure that people that use accessible parking spaces do have a way to charge if they have an electric vehicle also. And there's two different ways to do this. The language that we have uses universal spaces, which means it's big enough to accommodate accessible vehicles and wheelchair van type situations, but it's not limited to those vehicles. It's kind of like a handicap stall in the restroom where anyone can use it, but it is big enough for those who need to use it. The other option is having a split charger. So one part would go to an accessible space, the other would go to the next space over that is not limited to accessible. So that's the other way to do it. The language we have for universal spaces comes from Denver's adoption, and that was written by their city council member who is in a wheelchair. So we figured he must know what he's talking about.
He was. I got to moderate that hearing with him, and so it was really interesting for him to say. So you have this universal space that'll be van accessible, and so anybody can go in it. And so typically we think, oh, it's a van accessible space. I can't park in there because I don't have my accessibility sticker. But what he was saying was, he preferred that you have the van accessible space. It's big enough if we needed that accessible spot, but it's first come, first serve. So he said, don't put me up there higher on the totem pole, like, oh, I automatically get this spot because I need an accessible spot. And he said, I want, it's first come, first serve. If I get there, I can park there and I can use it. But if somebody else beats me to it, then I have to find a different spot. And so it was interesting because it goes against a lot of us building code folks who think that an accessible spot is an accessible spot and we don't get to park there. And so very interesting. I can see people who are still not comfortable with that idea going to the split charger, where you have one for the accessible spot and one for the spot next to it. It was pretty controversial in that code hearing, and it was mostly code officials who were like, no way, we're not gonna, take that van accessible spot.
Yeah. So with that, here's the recommended structure of the language. Like we were saying, single family duplex townhomes is just one EV ready spot per dwelling unit. Super simple. For commercial and multifamily, it divides it up by building type and by EV capable, EV ready, and EV installed. And so the most important line to look at there is the third one, multifamily, where it has a decent number, 15% of spots have a charger there. A few more have just the plug, and then 40% have EV capable, so just the conduit. So between that covers what? 60% of parking spaces would have the ability to have some sort of charging, some now and some in the future. The other building types are less than that, recognizing that we don't need as many chargers there. And some building types, industrial, for instance, almost none. So that is the recommended language for EV ready. And
Can we just tell them how we
yeah.
came up with that language? So, you know, a
Oh, yeah.
lot of people have had numbers all over the place. And so how do we come up with this set of percentages? One, percentage seems to be easier, right, than to say you need 5 spots. That parking lot, different buildings could come in, the parking lot configuration could change. It's easier to get a percentage, is definitely easier. But where did we come up with these numbers, Christine?
Right, you're right. Percentages definitely seemed easier, and it made this chart a lot less unwieldy. If you think it looks unwieldy now, try adding number of parking spaces, total, etc. And so this came from several different places. It came from what was submitted and running through and getting approved in the 2024 IECC development process. That still has a long way to go, but it had gotten approved through the subcommittee process at least, and there were a whole bunch of different groups working on that, including commercial building developers, EV manufacturers, efficiency advocates, etc., who are all coming to a consensus. So again, that's not a done deal, but that is where we started from. Denver also started from that same place to look at revising their previous standard, which was similar to this, except they actually had a higher percentage for multifamily. They had 80% for multifamily under EV capable, and they brought that down as recognition that we need a balance between cost on the one side and charging availability on the other side. So we've been, I think, calibrating it to market needs versus cost. And that's how we landed here. And then a number of other jurisdictions in the code cohort in that Northwest Denver area. They agreed with Denver's reasoning and also thought that since Denver is the big fish in the pond, developers would already be accustomed to meeting these numbers.
Correct, thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to, you know, like, we didn't pull the numbers out of a hat, right? Here's what people have been doing, what is working, what makes sense. We're really putting some thought into these numbers.
Yep, exactly. There's one other part that goes along with adopting EV ready language, and it goes into the code itself. And I think it's an important one worth noting, and that's that we want EV charging to be sub-metered. That is important because now we have statewide benchmarking and building performance standards for larger buildings, and smaller buildings are also wanting to benchmark and improve their building efficiency. And as they're looking at how do we reduce our energy use, they're also looking at how can we add EV charging, which increases their energy use. And we don't want them to be essentially penalized for putting in EV charging. And the way you do that is just to sub-meter those EV loads. And then when you're benchmarking your building, which if in case I need to back up a step, it means measuring how much energy your building is actually using and then comparing it to similar peer buildings. It can make sure that you're not penalized for adding EV charging.
And it
And
really
so
becomes
there's-
important in 2021 too, because, you know, if you're not remembering, 2021 does have requirements for energy monitoring for a lot of, for different sizes of buildings, not every building. So this would cover, you know, every building that has those EV charging, but they're already, that stuff is already coming into the code where we're monitoring the energy use. We have benchmarking requirements at the state level. So there's different things where it's already coming in. So we're not just throwing out ideas just to be throwing out ideas.
Exactly. And the way you do that is just by adding a line to the table in the commercial chapter that says exactly which loads have to be submetered or monitored. I don't remember what I have next. Okay, our ranking for this, we would rank it around medium. Again, this is totally subjective, but if you wanted to go more mild, you would put lower percentages for commercial and multifamily. If you wanted to go more aggressive, you would put higher levels for commercial and multifamily, especially on the multifamily side, for instance, ensuring that every space has some level of infrastructure. That's the approach that Denver had taken in the last round. And that's the approach that, for instance, Superior has in place now. Another step for going more aggressive would be to include renovations. And that would be based on the percentage of the building that's being renovated, and or if the parking areas are being touched as part of that renovation.
It is mild. I guess I mean, it's medium. I feel like it's mild for multifamily. And I mean, a lot of jurisdictions that are asking for EV ready are at least asking for something for multifamily, understanding that if I go to rent an apartment, I have a budget, right? And so I have to look around and find the buildings that meet my budget. A lot of times I don't have the luxury of saying, I'm going to look around and find the buildings that have an outlet or that have EV capabilities, because they might not be in my budget. My first thing is I got to find what meets my budget. And then hopefully in there, I can find something that also has EV. So because they don't have a lot of control over what they get, they have to meet their budget. And so a lot of jurisdictions that, if nothing else, are doing something for multifamily, but then a lot of planning and zoning departments that kind of look over parking, they are driving this EV for commercial. And so I feel like it is middle of the road for commercial buildings, and that we broke it, you know, that it's nice to be broke down by occupancy type and not just commercial versus residential. A lot more thought went into that, but I do kind of feel like it's mild for apartment buildings because those guys really just don't have a choice.
Yep. That's it for the main content, but as you could kind of start to get the sense, we do have exact drop-in code language for anybody who wants it, where you can just plop that into your 2021 adoption or tweak it as you see fit. And it has the benefit of already being vetted both through other forums as well as by a number of your peer communities across the state. We do know that it becomes a lot easier for builders the more consistent the language is, and it also becomes a lot easier for the building departments to verify compliance if the builders are doing similar things across all jurisdictions. They're more likely to be in compliance with the plans that they're submitting through the door. So we do have that language ready. I just want to tweak a couple things. Otherwise, I would have posted it already and put the link here. But with that said, probably in the next day or so. So send in your requests and we can provide that language. We have a couple different versions. One is just clean, like cut and paste. The other has little explanations about this amendment does this, this amendment does this. So with that said, I think that's the last slide. And
We do have some
Uh,
questions, and I'm happy to read the
mhm.
question if you want to. Oh,
Great.
Erica's, I thought you were gone, Erica, sorry. No, that's fine.
Not quite
Totally.
yet. You've got 15 minutes more and then I
Okay.
gotta hop off.
The
But
only thing that I wanted to add also before we go to question is this language that, like what Christine was talking about, we got some of this language behind what is going to be in the 2024. I would just remind people or let you know that this language also, a lot of the language went into the 2021. Right? It was approved through the entire process, got voted on, and went into the 2021. It ended up getting appealed and taken out strictly because the what is the word I'm looking for? The scoping and intent of the IECC at that time didn't line up with it. So it said, oh, we're to conserve energy over the life of the building, and they didn't feel that line up. So so it got brought out. So ICC went in and redid the entire scope for the 2024 to add all of these things in there so that it would go back in, and it is going into the 2024. But I just want you to know, like, it did make it into the 2021 through all the code official votes, through all of the everything. It just got taken out before it went to print because of that scope. So it's nice to know that we're creating these words based on what went into the 2021, went into the 2024, what hundreds of jurisdictions are doing all over the United States, but what a lot of jurisdictions within Colorado are doing, and really have taken, so many people have been doing it. We've been able to take this and fine tune it and create it. And hopefully, again, kind of like I said on the Solar Ready, if we can say, if we can go to the Energy Board in July of 2023 and say, hey, this is really working and we think this meets your intent, maybe they won't have to recreate the will either. Maybe, I don't know. But it's good to get some consistency, because once everybody starts doing it, then that brings the cost down as well. A lot of talk about cost, but once everybody starts doing it, the cost drops.
I saw a good question that came in about around affordability and the effect on the affordability of housing and the cost of living. We know that that is top of mind for almost everybody in the state, if not the country. I hear that we're not unique in our challenges for attainable housing, and there are a lot of different parts to that answer. There are costs to the builders to put in the infrastructure. Most of those costs are quite mild because most spaces, for instance, for multifamily, are just EV capable, so it is just the conduit. That costs very little. The chargers themselves don't cost too much if they're just level 2. And then the wiring costs more now than it used to. We don't know if that's gonna equalize or not. So the costs, I think, are fairly mild in the whole scheme of things, and will be there for the entire life of the building. Whereas if they want to go put it in later, it would cost many, many, many times more, so much more expensive that a lot of building owners just wouldn't even bother. So in that sense, yes, it does cost more upfront, but a lot less in the scheme of things. You guys might have heard that there was a separate bill in the last legislative session that would have set the minimums for EV infrastructure for commercial and multifamily, that then the governor vetoed because of the costs and the effect on housing affordability. But there was a lot more to that story, namely that bill had applied also to renovations, which, like I was just mentioning, are super duper expensive. And if it had been just applying to new construction, I think that he would not have vetoed it. It did make it through the legislature bipartisan for what it's worth. And then the governor committed to coming back to redevelop that bill in a more acceptable form. Although now that we have the Energy Code Board, I think that probably they will do that. It remains, they're talking about if there would be a separate bill or not, but my guess, if I had a crystal ball, is that they'll just have the Energy Code Board develop it. So the other part of that answer is that regardless of the cost, it's going to be required by state law. So there is that. And then a third part of the answer is that we have a whole bunch of new tax credits from the Inflation Reduction Act, not just for the EV itself, but for used EVs, in order to start getting used EVs more into the hands of more income qualified families. And those tax credits for new EVs, those have a cap on them as well for your income level, so that they aren't just going to the people who could easily afford them anyway without any tax credit. Anyway, that is to say that over the coming half decade, we probably will see more EVs getting into the hands of lower income people who do need a place to charge them. And I'm seeing more of a movement of not just saying income qualified families can get the crappiest buildings, the crappiest equipment, but thinking more long-term and more broadly, that they need safe, comfortable, healthy, efficient housing. And in this bigger picture, that includes a place to charge their vehicles as we're moving in this market transformation towards more EVs. What would you say, Sean, on that question?
Well, it's hard to put it's hard. It's a hard discussion. No matter what you do in the code, you're going to have a cost discussion. But I guess I would just say yes, reiterate, like you say, it's coming. No matter what, it's coming. And so, can we have a say-so in what's coming? Can we have some input into what's coming instead of just have a law that we have to answer to? And so this is our way of having a say-so in that. It's coming, but it's also, I guess I would just say that, I have been leery about the cost and requiring it as a mandate or whatever for a long time. But having helped so many jurisdictions over the last couple of years adopt new codes, I mean, easily 9 out of 10 of them are asking for this because they know it's what their community is asking for. So we may think that the cost is a roadblock or a stumbling block, but people are asking for it. And so what are we going to give them? We're going to give them something that somebody else mandates us to give, or we can put, not that somebody else mandating it won't put great thought into it. I'm not saying that, but I mean, we're looking at what is everybody doing? What are the great ways to do this? What are some easy ways to do this? What are not over the top and not, underdoing it? Like, we're really putting some thought. And so, yeah, cost is an issue, but people need it. People are asking for it. And so we have to give them something. Let's get consistent about it so that it will bring the cost down.
Indoor plumbing also costs a lot, and that is in the code, and that's kind of a nice to have. We used to have outhouses, but people decided this is a convenience that people need in their houses, and so I mean to say the broader point that some of this is about what homeowners demand, what building owners demand, and less about just the cost.
Right, and I often say this in my classes too, is that the codes change because we change. Right, everybody gets mad about the code driving this, the code driving this, code driving this. We are driving what the code is saying, right? So we're changing. We want the electric vehicles. We want we want lower energy bills, and so we are driving Just like we drove indoor plumbing or we drove more structural or, whatever, we drive that. So it's coming for a reason. It's not just, it didn't get in there because it was on somebody's wish list. Eric, is there another question in here?
There's a comment just on EV van parking
yeah.
space already being in the IBC for 2020-21. And so just it's already kind of being included and thought of in the standard codes even outside of the IECC. So
Great. Thanks for noting that.
okay, well, I don't see any other questions in the chat or in the Q&A, but Christine, Shauna, and I will stay on the line for the next couple minutes to close out the hour. If any other questions do arise, feel free to raise your hand and you can ask the questions directly as well. But otherwise, thank you both so much for your presentation today. Much appreciated. I know that this is something that hopefully is considered with the Energy Code Board as well, but we will see. So thank you all for attending and keep an eye out for the other webinars coming up.